If one watches whence the notion I arises, the mind is absorbed into that. That is tapas.
When did he live?
He was born in 1879. He was born on 30th of December at night on 1879. And he died or left his body on 14th April 1950 at 8:47 p.m.
Wow.
Yeah. And he lived amongst us, but he never touched money. He never took his own name. He left his home when he was 16 after that death experience that I began to speak about. He had that experience of death, and he's sitting there. He was alone in that room upstairs in his uncle's house. And suddenly he has this fear of death. Out of nowhere, suddenly this fear came that I'm going to die. Now, all these experiences happen because of our previous births. Our maturity, our spiritual maturity is also because of our previous beliefs from previous births. That's why some of us sit in these kinds of dialogue. 90% of the people are laughing at us. Look at the fools. What are they talking about? So that's what I'm saying. Why? Because we have some experience from the past somewhere that has sown the seed of us being engaged in this kind of dialogue. So anyway, he's sitting there. Suddenly he has this tremendous fear of death that I'm going to die. So much so that as if death had just come to him. And he leaves the book that he was studying from, and he lays down as if rigor mortis had set him. These are his own words. As if rigor mortis had set him. Rigor mortis is stiff body when you die. So he's laying there like a dead body, and while he's doing that, he is imagining his body being carried to the cremation ground or to the funeral or whatever, the cremation ground, and body being exhumed. And he could visualize this whole thing. And the fear of death was so strong and so real that he thought he was dead. And yet he could observe all these things. And therefore, this transformation took place in this young boy's mind that, oh, if I can see, though I'm dead, I can see myself being carried, then who am I? I cannot be this body. That was his transformation moment. We are not that mature to have that. But that day onwards, his interest in studies, he became a little different. So much so that sometimes the family said, you're acting very differently nowadays. But he was totally listless from that day. And within 6 weeks of this experience, he leaves home to come to Arunachala. Arunachala is the mountain where he came. That is in the town of Tiruvannamalai in southern India, south of Madras, now known as Chennai. Chennai, yeah, same. Have you been there? Yeah. Okay. Welcome. So he had heard the name Arunachala from a relative. He had met a relative who had come to their house, and he happened to ask that relative, where have you come from? And the relative said, I've come from Arunachala. And he says, and he had read in the one book that he had read, he was not exposed to Advaita Vedantic teachings or anything. He had read just one book, which is a religious book called the 63 Shaivites of southern India. There are 63 Shiva Bhakta who were known as Shiva gods. And he had read their stories. In those stories, again and again, sometimes the name of Arunachala came up as the mountain that dispels your doubts, the mountain that burns your ego, the mountain that is Shiva in the form of mountain. He had read that. So Arunachala name had some, because of, again, previous experiences, Arunachala had a word that had impressed him a lot. And when the relative says, I came from Arunachala, and he says, oh, Arunachala, is there a place like that? And the relative says, you don't know. Come on, young lad. You should know Arunachala from Tiruvannamalai. That's where I've come from, the town of Tiruvannamalai. Arunachala is in the town of Tiruvannamalai. That's all he had heard. And so after this experience of death, within 6 weeks, he leaves home to go to Arunachala because he had been given this information that there is an Arunachala, a mountain, which resides in town of Tiruvannamalai. So he goes, buys a ticket and comes to Tiruvannamalai. Beautiful story. Even the whole journey of 2.5 days of how many difficulties are thrown at you. When you become pure in your heart, your life will become very difficult. Difficult in the worldly sense. Things are taken away from us. Life throws a gauntlet, a lasso around your feet, and you trip because you are now getting closer to that clarity, that understanding where, who am I? I'm nobody. Is this making sense, guys? So that's the story. I've got many details, all these.
It's very interesting. It's very good story.
Sorry?
It's nice to hear stories.
Right. And plus, I have many details of this. I can go on and on, but I'm just giving you the synopsis of everything, you know. So that's how he came to Tiruvannamalai in 1896. On 1st September, he arrives there. He leaves home on 29th of August when he had this experience, and he leaves home. And all he does is looks up a schedule, a train schedule to go to Tiruvannamalai. But he looks up at the wrong station. And the fare is written as $2.75, 2 rupees and 75. And he takes only that much money from the box in the house. You know how many of our houses have a cash box. He takes only that much money from that box and leaves, because there was total transformation in his life by that time. And he writes a note, and such a beautiful note. I've seen the original note. I have a facsimile of that note here in my bag. Wow. If you want to see it, I'll show it to you. He writes, and his brother, when he was leaving that day, his brother tells him, where are you going? So he just made up an excuse. Oh, I've got an extra class in electricity. He used to study electricity. So his brother says, oh, you're going to school for extra class. My college is on your way. Pay my college fee. It's overdue. So take 5 rupees from the cash box downstairs and pay my college fee. But he doesn't take 5 rupees. He takes only the railway fare. So in the note, after writing that no effort be made in search of this, he says on the side, footnote, your college fee has not been paid. 5 rupees is still in the box. And then he writes at the bottom, he says, no effort be made in search of this. There's one more line I'm forgetting. And then he draws a line. He doesn't write his name. His name was Venkatraman. His family name was Venkatraman, but he doesn't write Venkatraman because here is an evidence of his total detachment from his own life. He starts by saying, I have set out in search of my father. Then the next sentence says, no effort be made in search of this, referring to his body. And then when he's signing off, he just draws a line. And that original note is very badly tattered now, but you can still see it because somebody had pasted it with glues at some point, then somebody tried to take it off, then tried to put another layer. So it started, but still the original note in Tamil is there. And I had a copy of that, but unfortunately I don't have it today.
And then who called him Ramana Maharshi?
Okay, excellent question.
Maybe
No, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. In 1902, so now he comes to Tiruvannamalai. So he comes to Tiruvannamalai and he is completely absorbed. He reaches this, there's a big temple called Arunachaleshwara temple in the town of Tiruvannamalai. I have to give you context to answer that question. The mountain is called Arunachala. Mountain is known to be Shiva in the form of a mountain. If all of you who may know about certain significant religious places in India, Kailash is a mountain. Yeah, some of you may have heard it. That's considered to be Shiva's home. Kailash is the ultimate mountain. That's where people go. It's very difficult to climb Kailash. And that's where he lives. Arunachala is Shiva in the form of a mountain. And there's a beautiful legend, a parable, a Advaitic Vedantic parable about it that we will not get into right now. But the question was, how did he get the name Ramana Maharshi? So now he comes there on 1st September and he reaches there late morning. And usually Indian temples, Hindu traditional temples, they close up after their morning prayers. They close up, nobody's allowed. But for some strange reason, the doors were open that day. He walks in straight and he goes to the sanctum sanctorum of the temple, where the linga is there, Shiva linga. Then he comes out, and this is a humongous temple. If you ever go there, there are ponds within the temple precincts and all that. So he goes to the pond, Achamainaman Koil it is called in Tamil. And that pond he goes to, and his feeling of this complete detachment is continuing. Huh? Chennai. No, this is in Tiruvannamalai. Which is about 3.5 hours down by road in a car from Chennai to Tiruvannamalai. So, what was I saying? So he comes out of the sanctum of the temple, comes out in the precincts and goes up to the pond. He was still left with a little bit of money from the railway fare and all that. He takes out that money and throws it in the pond. He takes out all his clothes, strips naked, tears one of the clothes and makes a loincloth out of it around his loins and jumps into the pond to take a dip. And somebody is watching him. As he comes out, now about to walk back into the sanctum sanctorum, there's a person who's standing there or sitting there. There are two accounts of it. But anyway, somebody asks him, if you have done all this, because they watch this young lad coming, throwing off his clothes, throwing a little money and everything. And there's something about him that this person says, if you have done all this, why don't you also shave your head? Ritualistically, when you take sannyas, you do Virajahoma, you go through head shave. Then you wear a dhoti or a lungi, like a sannyasi. And then you do your mantras and you relieve yourself, you unattach yourself from all the relationships in those mantras. So somebody was looking at him, says, if you have done all this, why not even shave the head? That should have been the first thing. But he had already taken a bath. So there was a barber sitting and barber gives him a head shave free of cost. Doesn't change. He didn't have any money and he said, no money needed. I'll give you a head shave. So no, the complete ritualistic thing was done for him, though not of his own volition. It was just done for him. And they say that you're supposed to take a shower after the head shave, but he had already taken a dip. So what happens? As he's walking back, this is true, or confirmed by people, that there was a sharp shower for just a few seconds as he was walking back. This is a true story. That's why Ramana Maharshi is considered to be the epitome of the saintlyhood, of the way the Upanishads have described the Munis. Upanishad describes how a self-realized soul is supposed to be if you were to see him in a human form. So he has been the epitome of that. So this is a short story. So now, fast forward, he's living in the precincts here and there, and people start bothering him. He is completely immersed in silence. He maintains silence for 12 years from that day onwards. And other urchins of the town, the boys, kids, keep pelting stones at him because he looks unusual. He's not aware of his body. His hair gets matted. His nails are growing. He's dirty. But he's not eating. Only when somebody would give him some food, or rather put it in his mouth, he'll eat it. So he was completely emaciated. His ribs are protruding. He's not aware of his body. And then he moves from the precincts of the temple to the outskirts, not to the outskirts, but the outside the temple, under mango tree, then another place, and then another place, and then finally to leave all this
cacophony of sounds and babel of tongues,
he moves up on the mountain to be on the quieter place. And the word, during all this takes about 2 years of time. During this time, people start calling him Brahmana Swami. Because he's a Brahmin and Brahmana Swami, but nobody knows who he is. Just before he moves up on the mountain, he's in the name is skipping my mind. So he's in a place where he's sitting there all alone every day, and somebody begins to become his attendant voluntarily. And he's so impressed by his immersion in silence as a young lad that he starts talking to somebody about doing an abhishekam on him. Abhishekam is when you have a deity, what you do in the mornings here is a very concise form of abhishekam. But when you sanctify a place or when you install an idol, you do a abhishekam. So this attendant is talking to a priest that he is not usual. I'd want to do an abhishekam on him. Abhishekam is you take a coconut and this and that and burn camphor. And so he's making arrangements to do abhishekam on him. And obviously he's immersed in silence, but he's listening to all this. So when he's wrapping up this thing to be done, he gets up suddenly and he takes a twig or something, and there's a wall. On the wall he writes, "Only food is enough for this." Because this guy used to feed him. Sometimes he'll bring him food and he was surviving. So he writes, "Only food is enough for this."
Okay.
So the first time people came to know the boy is educated, he can write.
Okay.
This is the first time people of the town came to know he's not totally uneducated, he knows something. So the word went around the town. So after really cajoling him, he gets up and on the same wall he writes, "Venkatraman Tiruchuli." He was from the village of Tiruchuli. So he writes Venkatraman Tiruchuli. So now the town knew this boy is Venkatraman from the town, from the village of Tiruchuli. So now after this, he moves up on the mountain. Sri Prakasham Pillai, who was an Advaita, had a lot of knowledge of Advaita Vedanta, comes up to Brahmana Swami up on the mountain to dispel his own doubts. And those are later on published as "Who Am I?" So he asks him 14 questions in the year 1902. And he answers them by either writing with his finger in the sand, or if he was given a piece of paper, he would write it on that or on the wall or wherever he could write. That's how the first time he reveals the prowess of his knowledge by giving answers to these very difficult Advaitic questions asked by Sri Prakasham Pillai. I'm coming to your point. How did he get named? So now still the world is calling him Brahmana Swami. This is the book. And he comes back again a couple of times. He asked him 14 questions. Now, there's another gentleman who would visit that town once in a while, who is much more eminent than Brahmana Swami was. His name was Ganapati Muni. He was known as Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni, Vashishta Ganapati Muni, who was a scholar of Sanskrit, the foremost scholar of Sanskrit in India at that time, who could recite any shloka by making impromptu. And Ganapati Muni himself is a scholar with a large followership, who could expound on these Sanskrit verses and Upanishadic things just like this. Kavyakanta is added to his name as a prefix because he had poetry in his throat. That's the meaning of Kavyakanta. He could come up with a recitation of an entire hymn or shlokas, like a compendium of shloka, impromptu. He could continue like that. That was the prowess given to him by Saraswati. That's the blessing of a goddess. So that's why he was known as Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni. He had done a lot of penance. So he had done a lot of penance everywhere in the country, and he was still looking for a place for final penance. And he has decided to move to the town of Tiruvannamalai, which is a very religious town. So Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni in November of 2007 decides to move to Tiruvannamalai. When he comes to the town, he's reminded of this boy called Brahmana Swami. Why are you smiling? Am I saying? 1907. Did I say 2007? 1907. Time is not a factor when you talk about the Vedas. So 1907. So what was I saying? So Ganapati Muni thinks of going to Brahmana Swami and dispel his doubts. He had only one doubt. He was such an erudite scholar. His only doubt was, what is the real meaning of the word penance? I have done so much of penance. I understand it. I can write about it. I can recite a shloka about it. I can explain to people, and yet I don't absorb the meaning of penance. So he comes up, he sits in front of Brahmana Swami. He recognizes him. Brahmana Swami also recognizes him. And then he says, so he comes up and he says, and Ramana Swami tells him,
if one watches whence the notion I arises, the mind is absorbed into that. That is tapas. When a mantra is repeated, if one watches the source from where the sound of mantra is produced, the mind is absorbed in that. That is tapas.
So this was the sound of Pranava, the Om that descended to awaken humanity, to remind it not to go outwardly, but to dive within, to reach our core of our existence, the source of our existence. This is how divinity descends to speak with us. Consciousness communicates. Reality reveals itself. And this is how the self that alone is beckons us to merge with it. The self that alone is beckons us to merge with it. Jai Arunachala. Arunachala.